Hello and welcome to another edition of Wise Counsel Weekly. I'm your host, Tanyan Farley, and I have my co-host Alex with me this morning. Alex, how are we doing?
What's going on, man? How's it going?
It's going good. And you guys might notice if you're watching on YouTube that we also have Bobby Dixon with us to start the show this morning. So Bobby, how are you?
Great, guys. Good morning.
Good morning. So we have a special edition today of Wise Counsel Weekly. We're having a Q&A roundtable. So we got a number of questions over the last couple of weeks. We've tried to answer a few of them in the podcast episodes, but we've been trying to keep the episodes a little shorter, because I know you guys are busy. So we decided to pull them all together this week into a Q&A episode. So we're going to have a little different format than normal. We'll go back to the normal setup next week. We have a great guest next week. But today we're going to run through some Q&A, get some thoughts from a couple different perspectives, and hopefully it'll help you guys out. So you guys ready?
Do it, man.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Let's rock. So first question, if you could choose only one, would you continue to develop a strength you have, or would you go and find a weakness you have and try and make that better?
That's a good question. I mean, me personally, I'm going for weakness every single time. I mean, your strengths are already strong for a reason, and something that you're already doing and probably not even aware of is continuing to, make those strengths stronger. So finding that weaknesses is definitely beneficial every single time, especially in business and in personal sense. One thing you can do is just consider, just the benefits of changing. Set a specific goal for that weakness that you want to work on. Embrace that challenge of making it stronger, becoming stronger in that aspect, and then just be consistent from there forward. Then it'll become a strength.
Bobby, you want to go next?
Yeah. No, Alex, I appreciate your answer. And while I do not disagree, I'll offer a counterpoint to that.
I like it.
I'm going to align with him.
I like
can
it.
feel it already.
I would say, my philosophy is to develop strengths, understand weaknesses, right? And understand sort of the landscape, right? Playing field, if you will, right? And so think about a tennis analogy. I don't think any great tennis player says, my plan is to, win this match by perfecting my backhand, right? I think what they go into it saying is, how do I use techniques, strategies, etc., so that I'm playing from a position of strength, right? And controlling the match, as best as possible. So using that sports analogy, I would say, understand what your weaknesses are, right? And understand where your vulnerabilities are, and understand what your inclinations are if you're put in a position of weakness or vulnerability, but develop your strength, right? And then sort of try to, control the situation or environment to the extent possible that allows you to play to your strengths.
Yeah. I think I'm going to align more with Bobby here, Alex. I'm sorry, man. I know
Here we
you're
go.
my
Here we
co-host,
go.
but I'm aligning with Bobby. So I have kind of a two-part answer here. So I think from a personal perspective, my feelings are a little different than a professional perspective. So I think from a personal perspective, your weaknesses, if there's something, if you have some sort of addiction, if you have some sort of part of your life that is seriously lacking, you have to address that. Like, I think that is a weakness personally you have to address. Now, there's also, in your personal life, there's strengths that you have, right? If you're funny, if you're well-spoken, if you're charismatic, continue to build on that, because that's going to take you a long way. But be very careful about evaluating what those weaknesses are, and understand there's hard weaknesses that you have to address, right? And then there's soft weaknesses that, hey, it's something that you should work on, but I agree with Bobby, your strengths will take you much farther. From a professional sense, I think that you should always focus on your strengths, because your strengths, I think, is what gets you in your role and gets you promoted. So if you think about, if I go in as a project manager, or I go in as a better example would be, I go in as a computer programmer. I don't need to know how to do financial modeling. And so if I spend all my time to grow a weakness that I have, that I might not be able to build a proper cash flow model, it's not going to help me in my career as a computer programmer. So I think you got to focus on, whether it's personal or professional, and then kind of dive into it.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
I think that was good takes from everybody. I like it.
I like this format, man.
Yeah. I liked Bobby's tennis analogy. I was going to go with the power pitcher analogy. So I was going to go, you know, Aroldis Chapman throwing 104. He doesn't need to worry about, you know, the accuracy of his changeup. So I understand. All right. Next question. So obviously, and sadly, right, with a lot going on with the COVID outbreak, a lot of people have lost their jobs and are now taking on new opportunities. So the question is, how do we manage the overwhelming feeling of taking on a new job? So I think we've all taken on a new job and been excited about it, but also there's a ton of unknown. So how do you kind of manage that and move forward?
That's a good one.
What do you guys want to take that first?
I'll go first. I'll go first. I'm sorry. Alex looked at me like I want you to go first. So I'm going to go first this time. So for me, I think I get this feeling pretty often when it comes to going to a new client, right? So it may not be a new job, but it's a new environment. It's a new project. It's a new complex, you know, problem to solve. And so I think it is completely natural to go in the first day and go in thinking about, okay, there's a lot I don't know. And I think that's okay to admit, right? But you need to understand that first day that you're trying to learn from the people around you, and need to focus on what you're good at. Kind of go back to the last question, focus on what you're good at and understand the culture around you, understand the goals around you. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I think asking questions, that first part, will help kind of level you out. Cause I mean, everyone else that's in that office has had the same feeling you have. And so I think going into that and knowing that you're not alone and everyone's kind of moved past that, I think is a great way to approach that.
I agree with that. I think it's more a little bit personality based, honestly. If you're a more talkative person, a more out there person that likes to meet people and likes to get to know people, I think that overwhelming feeling is a little bit less, because you can go in there and assert yourself. You can go in there and ask questions. You'll feel comfortable doing that in that space, to making sure that you're doing a good job at your new job. Someone like me, I'm a little bit more shy when it comes to certain times. So I go into, hoping to do a great job and everything, but I'm also shy, and I'm also don't want to mess up, and I also don't want to make a mistake for my new boss and things of that nature. So I think embracing a little bit of both and making sure you get out of your comfort zone in a sense, to make sure that you're doing a good job, to, alleviate the overwhelming feeling of worrying about making a mistake here and there, but making sure that you're doing a good job and acceptable for everybody as a business.
Sure. So, great answers. I'll just give you my perspective. For the last 10, 15 years of my career anyway, I'm typically entering somewhere new as a change agent, for whatever reason. So the assessment, is a little bit different. So for me, there's a couple things, I always try to find out, if I have a change agenda, right? Sort of, per that agenda, who are allies to that agenda. Who are adversaries, of that agenda, and kind of who's sort of neutral, right? You're going to fall into one of those three buckets, right? And then once I kind of understand, who's in which bucket, sort of the impact of those people within those buckets, right? The power and influence dynamic, right? Of those buckets. So that's kind of just an org assessment that I typically do, that sort of is going to drive my overall effectiveness. Then the other thing, just kind of personally, as I try to, pick an area, and kind of building on the first question of strength, sort of where I can add unique value.
Yep.
Right. So to submit myself and my agenda with the people who are in the allies bucket, potentially move people from neutral, to allies, adversaries. I don't worry as much about, right. Just sort of make sure that I can neutralize them. But that's kind of, like I said, because I'm entering organizations for the most part with a change agenda per someone in that organization, right? Communication and all those sorts of things are priorities.
No, I think that's great. I think especially from a change perspective, you definitely have to find those change champions, if you will, that are going to help you and your endeavor succeed. So I think that's a great point. Sure. All right, moving on to the next question. All right, so this is kind of similar to the last one, actually, but I do like it. So what's the best way to stand out in your field of expertise? So think about this. This could be as an employee in a company. This could be as a personal trainer at your gym. This could even be as a, if we have some young entrepreneurs out there working as a grocery stacker at the local grocery store, like how do I stand out and get noticed so I can move up the chain?
I like that one. I mean, honestly, it goes right back to what Bobby just said with adding value. In your field of expertise, being the person that stands out is somebody that's different, somebody that's doing not the norm, somebody that's being innovative, somebody that's creating change, shaking the trees a little bit, but also achieving the same results that you're looking for. Just like you mentioned with a personal trainer. I mean, everybody knows you can go to a 24-hour fitness and find a trainer that tomorrow, like it's nobody's business, but you want that guy that's doing innovative techniques. You want that guy that's helping you gain muscle at a faster pace. You want somebody that's maybe putting out great content on their social media, so it's something that you can watch and want to be entertained by, while also they're achieving their goals in that field. So I think that adding value and bringing different content to that field is something that'll be a big change for you.
You want to go next,
Great
Bobby?
answer, Alex.
Yeah.
I think, this question is sort of the essence of what we do as a firm and as management consultants, right? And you've got process, on one side, which is just how do we do things bigger, better, faster, stronger than everybody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And strategy, which is sort of not necessarily those things, but how you do things differently, as Alex mentioned, right? And so I think you can go in, and focus on being faster, better, bigger than everybody else. But the challenge there is at some point, there's always going to be someone faster, bigger, stronger than you, right? You're capped, right, to a certain degree. So you can distinguish yourself a bit. However, right, if you go in and saying, I'm going to be uniquely different, right, and whether that's focusing on the strength, whether that's taking something that seems to be an impactful task that no one wants to do, right, or whatever it is, it's how do I go in, develop and deploy a strategy where I'm going to differentiate myself, right? And because if you're different, it creates almost a barrier of entry to duplicate, right, or replicate yourself, as opposed to, like I said, just being, I'm going to take this task or process and just be faster, than everybody else. I mean, somebody's always going to be faster and slicker. So, different perspectives.
No, I mean, I think I kind of am somewhere in the middle of y'all's perspectives, and I kind of want to build on it. So I think for me, there's three elements to help you stand out, whether it's in the workplace or personally, right? And that's effort, attitude, and innovation. So I think about first one, effort. At the end of the day, we've talked about this before on this podcast, and then we've all been told this in our life. When you came in as an intern somewhere, the best way to get noticed was be the first guy in the office and the last guy out, right? Even if you're not in your mind doing anything productive, if you're contributing to that organization, you're showing the commitment and the effort. Same thing within your friend group. If you're the guy that's like, hey, I'll make sure that XYZ is happening, I'll help with planning this, like that's going to stand out. Attitude, I think you talked about, Alex, and so did you, Bobby. I think about it the same way, that if you come in every day with an attitude that's like, hey, I'm here to get better, I'm here to help this group get better, I'm here to help the people around me, come with me and get better, I think that's the way to go. I mean, I want a quick example. So I was talking with my mother-in-law, Leela Carlson, shout out Leela, last weekend, and we were talking about how it's been really difficult she's the receptionist at the orthodontics practice. It's been really difficult to deal with patients during this time because people don't want to wear masks. People don't want to be in that office. They feel confined. And so she talked about how really empathizing with those people and trying to communicate with them on a basis of, hey, these rules are not in place for me, right? These are in place by the state. These are in place by the people around me. I think her attitude in that has really helped. So I think that's a practical example. And the last one is innovation. So Bobby talked about this, but for me, like standing out is finding something that has an inefficiency, finding something that can be done better, finding a way to help, right? I know, Alex, we talked about a little about your retail background, but Alex found a way at his previous employer to streamline some operations and create a big savings for the company. I know that's what Bobby's done for however many years, and that's what we strive to do professionally. But I think practically at your level, if you were, we talked about earlier, at a grocery store, and you see, hey, we're constantly running out of bags or the carts aren't coming back, what can you do to help make that better? Even if it's a system that you want to put in place or an idea to bring to your manager, I think that'll help you stand out. That was a good one. I think people are going to take a lot from that. Yep.
That was good.
All right. Next question. What's the best way to learn and grow from rejection, i.e. being turned down for a job, contract, etc.?
All right. Now it's my time to shine. I've had a couple rejections with some jobs here and there before I landed on my feet here again. But this kind of goes back to my answer for the first question with how I built on weaknesses. I remember going to a few interviews with some other consulting firms, and also the one we just talked about earlier, Bobby, with when we sent me out on a couple of projects to do in Florida, and just going through the interview process, there was some items on the agenda or some items and questions that the interview was asking me that I wasn't prepared for, and that didn't have the answers for, and I didn't even know what some of the items were. I remember probably like 4 or 5 years ago, I went to a consulting interview and they asked about Python, which is like a programming for, data analytics and some a little bit with Microsoft Azure, I believe. And had no clue what that was when they were mentioning it, but I went home, wrote it down as soon as I left that interview, went and did my research on it, went and studied up a little bit and learned a little bit of it, just on YouTube and Skillshare and different websites like that, just to make sure next time that opportunity presented itself, I was prepared. And that's what I believe in, building on a weakness and being able to learn and grow from that type of rejection so that you're prepared the next time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go next. And I'll kick it back to you, Bobby. I mean, I personally have watched Alex grow because of that and become very good at managing projects and working on projects that includes elements that he just mentioned that he didn't know when he first started. And I think that's all of us, I think at some point go through a form of rejection, whether it's, with a contract that you really want, whether it's a job you really want. And Alex, I think you hit on the main thing, which is you didn't leave that interview or any of those interviews and go home and pout about it. Right. You went home with actionable items that you can follow up on to grow yourself and be better. I kind of think back to when we had Brian Cooper on a couple weeks back, and he talked about adversity and really how you can be resilient. And he talked about from each one of these, experiments, whether failed or positive, right? There's something to take away to bring into the next one. So I think from a practical level, right, if it's a job interview, it doesn't go well. Think about what caused that job interview to go well, right? Is it that you're trying for something that you're really not set up for? Is it something you don't know? And I think when you look at that, don't go home and be sad about it, right? Think about a way you can actually grow to make yourself better from that, whether it's in that profession or in something else.
Great answers, guys. And I won't reiterate them because I think they were great. I'll just offer sort of an alternative approach, which is, as I've kind of experienced successes and failures, I've examined all the things that you mentioned, but one thing that I've sort of, come across is this concept of seasons, right? So think about my failures or sort of delayed gratification, right? Or wins. And I asked myself, if I would have won that opportunity, at that point in time, if I would have gotten that job, right? If I would have been put in this position that I wanted to, was I prepared, to do what I needed to do at that time? And often, as I go through that kind of examination, the answer is, no. Right. Would have fumbled it, right? Or fumbled it up so much that probably, what was meant for good, might end up being a bad thing. And so one of my takeaways, in addition to everything you guys have said, is that there's seasons. And so I've come to an understanding that, hey, it might not have been my season, to win that contract, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to grow in between seasons, either personally or professionally, so that, when it comes back around, be in a much better, position to capitalize on the opportunity, right? So I agree and echo everything you guys have said in terms of lessons learned. And I'll just say that sometimes a perspective, helps me, which is you understanding that, hey, maybe that wasn't the right time and season, for that opportunity.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. Number one. Number two, I love that you use the seasons analogy. That's a big Eric Thomas, E.T. the hip hop preacher, kind of fundamental pillar. And I know I've listened to a lot of his stuff, and he talks about there are seasons of life that you go through and the people around you go through, and maybe they're not in the same season as you, but you need to kind of look at that, right? So I think that's a great one. And if for the folks that are listening, if you haven't listened to any of Eric Thomas's stuff, go check it out. E.T. the hip hop preacher on Instagram, on Twitter. He's got some great YouTube videos. I think one of his greatest lines is about you've got to want to be successful more than you want to breathe. And I think that's a great one. There's a great video on that. So go check that out. All right. So last question of the roundtable. So what tips or what What are your tips for overcoming the fear of public speaking or speaking in front of clients, employers, etc.? This is a good one. I mean, this one's tough, right? I think, Alex, I'm gonna let you go first, because for those of you that don't know, when we first started this podcast, Alex was telling me how he didn't like public speaking and speaking in front of people. So we just kind of tossed him in the fire here. So Alex, why don't you talk about how you've gotten this point?
I hate it. I still hate it, but I mean, I know in my career so far, it's something that comes literally on a weekly basis at some point. And going to Rice University, they prepared us pretty well just to be prepared for something like that. And the tips they kind of gave was, you know, one, mainly being just kind of do a little rehearsal for yourself if you're not comfortable. Like I said before, I'm shy. I'm a slightly an introvert at times, but I know I need a network and public speak at a lot of moments in my life. So one is probably just, like I said, rehearse, kind of write down what you're going to say, kind of rehearse it in the mirror. If you can go to the presentation room where you're going to do a presentation, that kind of go up there, stand where you're going to be, visualize how you're going to look around at the room and presentation, even with the PowerPoint, work on the clickers and stuff like that, just to make sure everything's smooth, transitions, things of that nature. And just like this podcast, just do it. That's the only way you're going to get better at it. Just go out there and do it. Talk in front of people. Hey, host a game night with your friends and you just be the moderator for the night. Just try to get in front of people, do a little bit more just to help you focus on, achieving that weakness.
Yeah, no, I think that's dead on. And I'll go next, Bobby, then I'll kick it to you. So I think for me, really with this, the fear you conjure up is way more than the actual thing, right? So your build up to it is really what causes the fear. But I do think, Alex, you hit on a key thing, which is you have to understand what your approach is going to be, because not everyone approaches public speaking the same way. Or for example, for this podcast, right? A lot of this stuff, I jot bullets for and talk from, and Alex does a lot of research on a lot of this stuff and his thoughts are really well constructed beforehand. And so I think you have to kind of test that out in your public speaking setting. So if it's with your family, if it's with, your spouse or your partner, or it's, with a client, whatever it is, like, I think you need to figure out what your groove is and then move from there. Because once you figure out what your groove is, how the flow of it's going to go. Guys, I've been doing this for a while. Bobby's been doing it for longer than I have, but I know that for me, I think about public speaking or meeting with a client or speaking on this podcast very much like I used to approach the first play of a football game, which is you're nervous, your toes are shaking, everything. And you get on the field and the first time you hit someone, everything goes away, right? You are back to, okay, I'm settled in. I know what my role is. I know what my skills are. And this is how I can move forward from there. So that's how I would approach it. I would say, do some test runs on a best way to prepare for it. And then just like you said, Alex, you just got to practice it. And once you kind of find your groove of what your cadence is like in those, you'll be a lot more settled in.
Great answers, guys. Y'all are on it today. I don't know what else I could add other than, so the question is overcoming fear, right? And I think you guys adequately addressed it, so again, maybe a different perspective, which is harnessing fear, right? So it's not the absence of fear sometimes that you'll create in this case, around public speaking and that sort of thing, but it's, given that fear, how do you harness it in a positive way? I was watching an interview of Mike Tyson, of all people. Supposedly he's making some comeback or something, but they were interviewing him, an old interview, and they were asking, this is one of the most feared, if not the most feared knockout artist of all times, right? And they were asking him this question about fear, and he actually said, Mike Tyson said, I have fear before every fight, right? Part of that is just the respect of opponent, right? So in the case of this discussion, it's just the respect of the of the job, right? Speaking in front of people, you got to respect that, right? But with that fear, he says he harnesses it, right? And it helps him kind of hone his skills, facilitate his rage, whatever it is. Mike Tyson's got a channel, right? To knock people out in 30, 40 seconds or whatever. So again, agree with everything you guys said. It would just say, the other aspect of fear is just harnessing it and using it for your good, right? And understanding, hey, I may not ever overcome this. Some of the greatest public speakers, right, never enjoyed it, right?
Definitely.
Dr. King. If you research, kind of things about his personality and that sort of stuff, an extreme introvert, right? And certainly, at the end of, his life was dealing with, depression and some of the things that were going on, in his life in the context of the day. But in those states, right, delivered some of the most profound and prolific, and poignant,
Right.
speeches in the history of mankind, right? So it's a harnessing of those things, right? To be effective. So no, it's great discussion, well-rounded answers. Hopefully we've offered a few perspectives, around these great questions, Tanya, that people can consider. So, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I
You, man.
completely agree, and thank you for joining the roundtable. I know it's a little longer than your normal segment, but I appreciate you joining. I think the thing that I really liked about these questions this week from our listeners was all of these are actionable items. These are
Yeah.
things that apply to your life. This isn't how do I move my $100 million corporation to
Right.
$200 million, right?
Right.
This is very much I can apply it every single level. And this is the kind of content that I know I wish I would have had 10 years ago, right? I know that the podcast industry has boomed since then, but I think hearing this kind of stuff is great. So next week, we'll be back to our normal setup with the episode. We got a great guest coming on, have some great questions. So keep sending your questions in. You can send them to us on LinkedIn, on Instagram, to our email at info@athenianconsulting.com, whatever works best for you. We've been getting a lot on LinkedIn, so keep it up. So guys, as always, take time to breathe and focus on your current situation. Adversity breeds ingenuity. And Alex?
And wise counsel leads to sustainable results.